So, hi, it's my very great pleasure to be sat here with the legend that is Jeff Berlin. Anybody who's been interested in jazz music or jazz rock or jazz fusion or simply just good music over the years will realize that this guy has been at the heart of a lot of incredible music, a lot of incredible albums, and a lot of incredible players. And for me, it's a huge pleasure to say, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you.
Yes, sir.
I'm always kind of envious of anyone who grew up in the time you did through the 50s and 60s, because I think you had this wonderful era of music that came, it sort of lasted up to me, seemed to go up to about 1974 in the rock thing, but you just had this emergence of fusion of ideas. You had the whole hippie thing happen, the whole Woodstock, it kind of permeated through to the jazz fusion stuff. You had bands like Tony Williams' Lifetime, you had Mahavishnu Orchestra, you had Weather Report, you had stuff coming everywhere.
Right.
That must have been just wonderful for you to grow up in, as a working musician in that.
It was the luck of the draw. I was very fortunate, as a lot of my colleagues and friends were. We were born at exactly the time when playing was lauded as something great. You know, the great players were heroes. Cream in the late 60s were knocking people out because they jammed.
Yeah.
Hendrix's thing wasn't just from Purple Haze. The man did long solos. And it was that era that promoted and supported, and then continued into the 70s with the band you mentioned, Weather Report and Mahavishnu. Jaco Pastorius came along, Stanley Clarke, Anthony Jackson. So it was an era of the proliferation of the best players, in my opinion, almost ever, in that everything that happened then was created newly. So yeah, and I was there amongst them, playing with them, and watching them create their thing. It was amazing, it really was.
You've played with some monster players. I mean, you've been in there with some great, you know, some of my favorite drummers of all time. You've worked with Dennis Chambers. He was in your band with Scott Henderson. Billy Cobham. You've worked with. What did you look for in a drummer? What do you look for in a drummer? What's the key thing that sort of attracts you, makes you want to play with somebody?
Well, the ironic thing is that I don't look for anything, in that I expect that the drummer and I are going to see eye to eye about time and feel. So it's an expectation thing. When I was younger, what I looked for is that I wasn't going to mess it up, because I'm a kid playing with these great musicians. Played with Tony Williams, who was the drummers in New York? I'm trying to think. Gadd, Chris Parker, Jimmy Young was there. Then I jammed with Narada Michael Walden. We'd play. From Pat Metheny's band, Paul Wertico.
Paul Wertico, yeah.
Danny Gottlieb.
Yeah.
So my running pack with these drummers and more, I'm blanking on them. But the thing that everybody had in common wasn't that, are we going to relate? Because that was expected.
Sure.
There was no anticipation of, I hope we sound good together.
Yeah.
It was more, let's play. And often the surprise is that there was a meeting of musical spirit. And when that happened, the music got even higher. But I never had an expectation, even to this minute, of playing with a drummer in any thought, way, or means.
Yeah.
It's so well established what I'm supposed to do, what he or she is supposed to do, that we just, that's the joy of it. We're liberated from any expectations. Let's just play.
And when you were playing back there, what sort of gear were you using back in the day? What sort of bass were you playing?
I had an old Fender Precision, and then my very first touring gig was with Pat Martino, the jazz guitarist, and we did a cross-country tour. And when I ended up in California, I'm very new to the electronics, and I didn't have an amp, so every gig provided something. Bass amps weren't really that sounding good in those days, in my opinion. So I couldn't get a sound until later I realized it was the P-bass pickup was far away from the bridge. And when I got to San Francisco, chatting with somebody about how I couldn't get a tone, he says, there's a guy, Glenn Kwan, who invented the badass bass bridge. I think they went out of business, but I used that bridge for years. I went to Glenn, and he put on Bartolini's, built by Bill Bartolini for me.
Right.
He was a small shop.
Yeah, yeah.
Glenn said, make something for this guy. And that's the first time I had an insight into the bridge pickup and how the sound was. So that was my first, let's say, really good sounding bass, was a Fender Precision that had been altered to accommodate two specially wound Bartolinis. Wow. Over the years, I tried amps, but never really found anything that truly affected me as a positive sounding amp until I got with Mark Bass.
Great. And when we look back at those periods, you played on some great albums, you did some great albums yourself, but the recording techniques of the day, of course, have changed. You know, back in the day, they were 8-track, 16-track or whatever, and you were lucky 24-track.
2-inch tape.
2-inch tapes. And now, of course, we have the digital domain. Do you have any thoughts on how things, you know, a lot of people say it used to sound better back in the day, and the old analog warmth and things. What are your feelings on that, especially with recorded bass?
I frankly am not that affected by analog versus digital, in that digital simply can be with a good mixer, because actually England has incredible mixing people, incredible, and they can mollify and make something sound, let's say, vintage of a certain period, or do certain things. So I'm not personally a fanatic of the analog versus digital, because to my ear, I can produce a warm bass tone, and I heard you play guitar. It's a warm sound you have. So if it's recorded, I'm certain that that in digital form is going to sound, if not equally as good, equally as unique as analog. It's just, I don't think it's worth the attention, because certainly most listeners can't tell the difference, and perhaps only the artist just might determine something. But that is a testimony to their uniqueness. They have a good enough ear, and they can say, I can hear the difference. That's what makes these artists special.
I think you first probably came to people's attention with Bill Bruford,
yes,
who of course was a wonderful drummer at the time. How did that come about? How did you get to work with Bill?
I had met Ray Gomez through Carmine Appice, who was a Long Island guy.
Great drummer.
And he played with Vanilla Fudge and Cactus, woefully one of the most underrated and incredible rock bands I ever heard was Cactus. Tim Bogert, was it Rusty Day, was it? Carmine and Jim McCarty. Anyways, all right, I'm off on a tangent. But I met Ray Gomez through Carmine. Patrick Moraz knew Bill and Ray. Bill told Patrick, it's like a map through Sussex, and that I need a guitarist. Ray was going to audition for Bill. Ray invited me to join because they needed a bass player.
Right.
Bill and I played. We hooked like this, and Bill and I hooked up, and Ray didn't get the gig, but I did.
Great. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Is history, and I owe a great debt, and I'll always say this to Bill Bruford for many reasons. One, he was he is an exceptionally intelligent guy, but he had a great vision of live playing and recording, and, excuse me, overtly and covertly through demonstration, through commentary. I was a guy who could do this,
Yeah.
but he said, you know, that's a little bit much. Why don't you do this? And he helped me to grow in music, and I'm indebted to him to this minute.
Cool. Because you were you had a bit of an aggressive style, it should be said, at some point. You were quite an out there player, quite a forceful bass player, and that sort of came to be a bit of a, if not a reputation, something that people would hire you for. If they wanted someone who was going to get in there and get stuck in, that kind of became a thing of yours for a while, I think.
I think so, but I will say it was, and I talk about this because it's part of me. There's a before psychotherapy Jeff. And an after psychotherapy Jeff.
Cool.
And the before psychotherapy Jeff had its negatives and its positives. The negatives was I was aggressive. I didn't like the character that I was. I didn't like how I interacted with people. I found, you know, I couldn't solve it, so I had to go to therapy. But one of the positives was it got me to kind of go, love me, love me, love me, love me, love me, love me. And it was later I put all this together after a lot of deep work. And so the result of it is this guy is still imperfect human being, but the playing has mollified. I still have some aggression.
You can pull it out when you need to.
I suppose so, but my playing is sort of, you know, become, I would say, more human and more real. But yes, I was an aggressive bass player, fortunately in a career and at a time and with a band that permitted it. But if I was this Jeff in that body, I would have softened it a bit.
Okay, cool. Well, one thing we do need to talk to you about is over recent years you've been very involved in education,
Right.
And you've had various bass academies, various schools, and indeed you have a YouTube presence now. But you've said one or two things that people would class as controversial,
Sure.
And you stick by them. And it's to do with, if I'm correct, the difference between learning and performing. You see a very straight line between that, and you have very strict ideas about how people should learn. So, for example, one of the things that most musicians are taught is that they should sit alone in a room with a metronome and follow it. And you're not down with any of that. Would you like to just expound on that for us for a little while?
I will. I'll try to simplify it. It's a deep subject. Learning and playing have two different goals in mind, even by the titles. Learning, the best I can describe it, is to investigate music for the purpose of learning it and improving as a player, which is also often an out-of-time experience. It's like learning a second language. We don't learn it in time. We slowly work it out, and we say it, we make mistakes, and we fix it. So the goal of learning is to grow and investigate. The goal of playing is to spontaneously put out and be emotional, and substantive, emotional at that moment, perform. So in that the goals are so different, bass education in particular, in my opinion, has abandoned the way to be taught that most other instruments still adhere to. The whole classical genre and most of jazz teaches musical content, and for that reason, practically all classical musicians are superior players in their style than bass players are in theirs, and most jazz players are superior players than most, not all, you know, rockers and bluesers or guys that haven't learned how to read music. So in the fact that bass educators, again, in my opinion, have abandoned teaching music for the most part, because they teach groove, which doesn't need to be taught, or technique, which really doesn't need to be taught, chops, licks, stuff like this. They've entered into the performance philosophy of teaching, but performance, every famous rocker is self-taught. Just about. People mention Stu Hamm at Berkeley, but he studied music. Just about everyone that anyone can think of is self-taught in rock or funk or blues. Slap teachers are self-taught. Slappers are self-taught. So when these things became academic principles, I said that they're not worth to invest in. And I don't apologize for saying that, because I'm not saying one shouldn't play these things. I have no comment on one's style, guitar, or anything. I'm saying if one invests a check to be taught they're not, in my opinion, going to get what they think they're going to get. So I say this stuff publicly because sort of an unwritten edict in the bass world that you must be nice. You must not criticize. You've got to be, peace and love. I like the philosophy, but it doesn't supersede the fact that there's certain things to share. I thought about this. There's food critics. There's art critics. There's theater critics. There's book critics. People are critical on the internet. Lincoln said he has the right to criticize who has a heart to change things. So I'm paraphrasing. Criticism is not saying you personally are a bad guy. I know Brexit is a sensitive point at this juncture. So people pro-Brexit aren't saying, I hope they're not, that the anti-Brexit people are such and suches and so-and-sos. And the people that want to stay hopefully aren't saying the pro-Brexit people are a bunch of, so-and-sos and such and suches.
It's not personal.
It isn't personal. My criticisms are regarding an industry, a worldwide industry. And I only say it so that people can go like this and then say, okay, Berlin says this, ticks me off, but find out if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, ignore me. And if I'm right and you don't wish to go with it, ignore me. I'm simply putting out a thought. I don't apologize to anybody for sharing these thoughts because I don't think I'm wrong. And the only reason I think I'm right is I'm an educated guy from 5 years old on violin. I've seen how guys are taught. So bass educators, most schools worldwide, to me, have very poor result-oriented bass departments. The biggest names on down, the biggest bass players you can think of, the teachers on down, if they're not teaching us the notes, because notes come first, they don't come last.
Absolutely.
And there's my 3-minute monologue.
And I think there's an even bigger phenomenon that I saw firsthand this year at NAMM, which is kids, and it is mainly kids, who are able to play something, maybe a solo or a piece, in its entirety, brilliantly well, and nothing else, because they've learnt it off of YouTube. They've literally sat and watched a lesson that shows them how to play Eddie Van Halen's Eruption or how to play a John Mayer tune, and they've taken it, they've learned every bit of it, and that's all they can do. Nothing else. They can't jam. So the wonder, the musicality, the utter pleasure of playing with other musicians is denied them, and yet to all intents and purposes, people go, oh, they can play. It's a very strange and I think dangerous sort of realm to get into. So I'm with you. I know exactly what you're saying.
Well, I appreciate that. My addition is that I have personally, I've never commented to anybody, and never will, that one wishes to play Eruption, or one wishes. That's the artistic choice. Art is different than learning. So my focus is on learning, and I can actually validate how learning is a separate thing. I feel there's only 2 ways to learn, literally on the planet, and would invite anybody to come up with a 3rd way. And the 2 ways are being self-taught. What is self-taught? People say you can't be self-taught. You're listening to records here. They're teaching you. It's self-taught because one decides that this is where they're going to go to listen.
And they find the information they need.
They find the information they need on their own. They're guided by their own muse, their own investigative powers, their own curiosity. So that's a self-taught guy. And every rocker, actually every bass player watching this is self-taught. I'm self-taught. Everyone is self-taught. The other way to be taught that is proven to work is to be taught musical content to practice. And in that 2 areas of proven functionality, I can't think of a 3rd option except to combine the 2.
And the only thing I would add is this strange phenomenon that I'm seeing now. As I say, I as a kid at the NAMM show the last time I was there, he pulled these guitars down and he played phenomenally each time. And I went out, I said, you're great. So let's have a bit of a jam and play. And I said, if I play an E sharp, and he was, I don't know chords.
I understand why.
That's kind of terrible in a way because, for me, I think one of the great pleasures is learning. It is from scratch. It is one of the great voyages of discovery, and it just seems to sort of be denied to them. It's almost like a party trick rather than the actual I don't know, as I say, the pleasure of learning properly.
That's an interesting term you said, denied, because one of my comments, one of my negative elements about bass teachers, again, not as people, not as human beings, but in the profession of teaching, is that they've denied students the truth, and there is a truth about learning. So what you're referring to is if the guy can't play an E7 chord, I have to say this again, I have no comment about that because it's their choice.
Sure.
That's what a self-taught guy does. My only issue is with schools and teachers who say music isn't that important, and they do. If one says that groove
And
is the
feel
most
is more
important
important
thing,
than
and
harmony,
feel, then they've denied their students the truth of learning. Because groove isn't first in the importance of things, it's last.
Yeah.
Nobody loses a groove by looking for a right note. It doesn't happen because everyone's prepared to jam or play.
Yeah.
So my only issue is that bass teachers worldwide that don't tell students straight out that everything that you have paid or anyone has paid to be taught is taught the facts, not the art. The law is taught factually. Music is taught, the law is taught factually. Driving a car is taught factually.
Sure. Yeah.
Driving a lorry in England, you have to pass the thing. There is nothing that isn't taught factually. I invite people to think what is. The only thing is that bass teachers have not gone, they've reinvented the wheel when it wasn't broken in the first place.
Sure.
So that's my issue, and that's why I've been so verbal. Not personal. The bass community can't stand criticism. They just can't stand it. The notion of this infuriates people. But love, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, sometimes is a little tough, and sometimes said in order to help. Smoking can hurt you. And I tell you with love. Oh, who are you? You're telling me this guy's make your decision, but that's the nature of this thing. I don't criticize to hurt, and I'll say for the 15th time because I'm repeating myself, I don't apologize for this. I want people to know only in the case of writing a check, here's the school, here's the teacher, here's the camp, here's the website, here's the private guy, here's the hang. You're not going to get better because there's only really two ways to get better.
Sure. I understand.
So, and I invite people to find if there's a third way. And if you can't, make your decisions. Cool. But I'm not going to let up on this because I'm a stubborn son of a bitch. No, I want people to be helped. Yeah, I care.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit separately afterwards about your bass, and hopefully we're going to go into a little bit of detail of that. But could you just talk me through your involvement with Cort? How long have you been with these guys now?
I think about 5 years. Mark Bass is my amp company. I got exceptionally lucky. I could not find an amp, and I'm saying this because it's part of the Cort story.
Right.
When Marco Di Virgilis sent me an amp to check out, I was instantly transformed. That is an absolute fact. Whoa, like the two chords we played and we went, whoa.
Yeah.
That's sort of the effect I had when I heard my first Mark bass in my house.
Right.
He sent me one. To move forward, he mentioned that the Cort people wanted to approach me to make a bass. The first bass they built is this one.
Wow.
And it was so well done
and
right so perfect,
time,
right out of the slot, that I said, this is my bass. Don't make another one. Don't fix this. Don't do that. The design is my wife. She said, maybe do two things. And they put this little veneer. And so I got very lucky to play a bass that I felt is legato and also very has a lot of punch to it. Cool. And so I was very fortunate, and this to me is the best bass that I have ever played. As far as I'm concerned, it's my bass till the end.
Great. Well, as I said, we're going to go into a little more detail in a film afterwards, and I could genuinely talk to you all day. But for now, Jeff Berlin, thank you very much indeed.
Cheers. Thanks, Steve.